Good morning.
Morning, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, everyone. Let us start our discussion. Welcome to this third session of our course. What I planned for today is to complete our introduction part, which we started in our first session. Some of us are left, so we will have that thing. Then some recapitulation regarding our previous session. And after that, we will see some questions which were raised in our previous session. And then we will move on to see the branches of philosophy and what are the significant issues in different branches. This is the third session I told you all. So those who missed previous sessions, they can see the videos available on the drive. Now, the present topic of discussion is basically introduction to the subject matter also. And since the broader area philosophy covers what we call research and publication ethics, and therefore we started our introduction with the broadest notion of philosophy. And in the last session, we have surveyed some 30 or 35 definitions with two purposes. One purpose was to get some hold on what is philosophy, what is essentially called philosophy or philosophical practice. And the other purpose was to show that it's not that we can just go on exploring and getting new things. After some survey, after some observation, we will have hold on something which is essential, something which is common. And then, of course, every definition has some addition. And that addition is a kind of instantiation of the practice of philosophy itself. So if we look at the essential part in philosophy, so I could reformulated it in this way, that philosophy is thinking as clearly as possible. So this is very much practical approach. We are not being idealistic. We are not being absolutistic. So we will try in our own area to think as clearly as possible. And if we look at the hardcore area of philosophy where such kind of aspiration is found, so thinking about the most fundamental concepts and principles involved in our thought, in thinking, in our action, and our understanding related to reality. So broadly, we in fact consider this is the area in which philosophy operates. And in all our disciplines, we are doing precisely this very essential practice. We try to understand what are the basic fundamental concepts in our own area and what are the functional principles which we are using to operationalize those concepts for different purposes. And the second part, which you see, thinking as clearly as possible about things that most people take for granted. So I highlighted the subjects of philosophy in red. So what is called things in this B part is basically thought, action, and reality. And we are aware that, yes, we take so many things for granted in these three areas. To just show that there is a wonderful thinker in the British tradition who captured almost the core practice in philosophy in a very brief way in his definition. And if you wish, you can just refer to him. He is Bertrand Russell. And his book is a collection of articles. In fact, this is the title of the book, The Problems of Philosophy, and the first chapter of this book is Appearance and Reality. So there, he says something like this: is there any knowledge in the world which is so certain that no reasonable man could doubt it? This question, which at first sight might not seem difficult, is really one of the most difficult that can be asked. When we have realized the obstacles in the way of a straightforward and confident answer, we shall be well launched on the study of philosophy. And now he writes the definition, in fact, essentially what philosophy he means. For philosophy is merely the attempt to answer such ultimate questions, not carelessly and dogmatically, as we do in ordinary life and even in the sciences, but critically and exploring all that makes such questions puzzling, and after realizing all the vagueness and confusion that underlie our ordinary ideas. So I have highlighted certain parts in his definition. First part, you notice that a philosophical approach, a philosophical practice is merely an attempt. What it means, it is just an attempt. You are trying to answer. It's not that you have pretension that you will be answering the question forever and for all time, and that would be absolute answer. And that is the essential message which we need to keep in our mind when engaging in different research activities. That we are trying to get an answer to certain basic questions, but then we have a kind of skeptic approach that the answer which we arrive at may not be final. And certainly in the empirical sciences, no answer is final, that we all know, right? And this is called philosophical approach. When you try to answer, you must be aware the limitations regarding your answer. And that is what we call, we are trying, we are attempting to answer, right? We don't have pretension to say that I am answering, right? I'm answering is being little bold, right? So I'm trying to answer. I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to do, right? And then in doing this, another part which is highlighted is not being careless or dogmatic. Now, if you consider what is it to be careless, what is it to be dogmatic, and in a much more stimulating way, he says that such attitudes, careless and dogmatic attitudes, we find in our ordinary life, even in the sciences, right? So for some of us, his articulation would be baffling. What he is saying, are we careless in doing sciences? Are we dogmatic in doing sciences? This question must come to our mind. Now, what he means perhaps is that in doing something in our ordinary situations, in our ordinary life, we operate on some kind of gut feeling. That means we are not certain about our approach, nor we are certain about the result which we are going to get, right? So we are operating in some sense in a rather shaky way. And then if we are careless, which means that we are not attending to things which are necessary to be noticed. Being careless simply means that in doing anything, we are required to do something which is necessary. And of course, things which are not, let us say, within our access, or things which are of very subtle nature, we may miss, but we are not supposed to miss something which is obvious, which is clearly observable. Consider the crisis which we are facing, corona crisis, and look at the behavior of the researcher who entered in the lab, in the biotechnology lab, whatever, in Wuhan, without, we can reasonably say that without taking precaution, proper caution. And then he moved out of the lab again carelessly without having precaution. Now, one may say that, yes, even today we have asymptomatic cases where you are not aware that you are infected, but still you are spreading. But then we are infected not because of any other thing. The ultimate responsibility lies on us, that we are careful. So when Bertrand Russell is pointing out related to the process of philosophical thinking, he is saying that this kind of care is necessary. And since we are dealing with our thoughts, ideas, it is rather demanding. It's not that easy. It's not dealing with the material objects, right? And then since they are related to our beliefs, and in our beliefs, we have so many unexamined beliefs. Now, if this is the situation that we carry so many unexamined beliefs, and if we are working on the basis of those unexamined beliefs, we are being dogmatic, right? Now, in ordinary life, we can understand, but if we apply the same understanding to the scientific approach, in what sense we need to make sense of this dogmatism in sciences? In fact, I would like to understand it in this way, that what we call dogmatism in sciences is basically having the pretension to answering certain things, and forgetting that it is just an attempt. So when we have this kind of pretension that we are answering, we are finding solution, and that solution is final solution as if. And those who are poor in doing sciences, they carry more such pretension than those who are fantastic scientists. But Bertrand Russell, he was a mathematician. He was a philosopher, wonderful analytic philosopher. So he's saying something with responsibility. And he's not like at least me, who is not very familiar with the essential practices in sciences. Bertrand Russell is a fantastic philosopher and mathematician. So he's saying with some responsibility. So try to make sense of what is dogmatism in sciences. And if you wish, you can refer to one of the articles, Two Dogmas of Reality or so. Anyway, I will download that article and send it to you, and I request all of you to just see what are two dogmas, and sciences, and in fact involve that kind of dogmas. Now, how to be free from that? We need to be critical, we need to be reflective, and we need to be inquisitive enough to get into the issues and see the correlations, see the interlinks. So the third thing which I highlighted is having critical exploration. That is essential. And why it is required? This is the purpose. We are looking for clarity of our thoughts. We are looking for avoidance of confusion. So we want to get over these two things. Because of that, we find a kind of careless approach. We find a kind of dogmatic approach behind our activities. Now, I have just reformulated the thing in these 3 lines. What is essential about philosophical approach? So, the critical reflection or thinking is the core of philosophical inquiry. That is essentially what we call philosophical approach or philosophical inquiry. And then we are inquiring, or we are exploring into the basic or fundamental issues of certain sort. Now, what this means, this second point requires little explanation, that philosophical inquiry is a way of thinking about certain sorts of questions. Now, in last session, you might have noticed that we saw that philosophy is the basic discipline from where all other disciplines emerged. How the other disciplines emerged from the discipline of philosophy? They emerged by fixing their methodology. For example, physics fixed its methodology, or taking all the basic sciences together, fixed its methodology by having the ultimate test, which is empirical verification, observation. So whatever hypothesis you propose, whatever theory you want to propose, that must be empirically verifiable. In fact, you start with experiments, repeat the experiments, and through repeated observation, you establish a theory, and that kind of establishment is called scientific theory, right? That means you have fixed a methodology, and anything which is called scientific must qualify that, must be tested on that basis, and if it passes that test, only then it can be called scientific. Similarly, you have empirical approaches in social sciences, in management studies, and for that you have definite methodology. In fact, it sounds a little awkward, but I see many people devote a chapter or maybe a section in the thesis with the title research methodology. It may be a kind of requirement that you are going to use this method, you are going to use this program or this sampling method, etc., for your research. And for that, you need to have a kind of clear statement so that the examiners or your audience or readers are not confused that which method you are using. This again suggests that the disciplines where you can clearly point out that you are using this method, those disciplines are departed from what we call core discipline of philosophy by way of fixing their methodology. I don't find any better way of making sense of the departure of other disciplines from what we call philosophy. Now, what we call today in the academics philosophy is left with only hard questions, if you have noticed that. What are hard questions? The hard questions are related to who we are and what are the things surrounding us. And the approach is a kind of general approach. It is not a specific approach. How to make sense of it? We raise the questions which are raised by sciences, which are raised by any discipline. In fact, the questions are common. They all are essentially raised by philosophers. And then when the disciplines advanced, they started specifying different dimensions of that question. So when we say philosophy is left with only hard questions, the hardness of questions lies in its general approach. It raises the same question, but then something funny happens. And that happens with every academic philosophical approach. We start with the same question, but then we arrive at different answers. So all philosophers can be conveniently grouped into different camps, suggesting that they have arrived at this answer by raising the same question. For example, who am I? If this question is raised, then a materialist philosopher will give answer to one way. A spiritualist philosopher will give answer to another way. And then within materialism and spiritualism, you have diversity of, again, responses, which means we arrive at particular answers, though we started with a general question, who am I? That is not true of what we call scientific discipline. So we observe certain differences in philosophy and sciences. The essential difference is precisely this, that if we answer to any question in sciences, it's not that the question is the same, question may be the same, but then the answers which are offered by the scientist must also have some kind of commonality, some kind of universality for their acceptance. If the scientific community does not agree on any particular answer, that means that answer is not perfectly scientific. So it seems that philosophers and scientists, social scientists, begin with similar kind of questions, but then philosophers arrive at variety of answers, and then in the scientific community, we try to universalize our answers. Philosophers cannot universalize, though they try hard, but that is a serious limitation with the philosophical answer. Why? Because philosophers are too careful regarding the limitations of their answers that they go on qualifying it and reaching to a very narrow answer, which cannot be acceptable on general grounds, right? They want to be so careful that their answer is not rejected. And therefore they go on classifying, narrowing down the claims, and then arriving at something, and they think that that thing is still essential, that thing is still remarkable, right? So that is what we call philosophy is left with hard questions. Why questions become hard? Because common answers are not possible. Still, we are trying to get answers acceptable to others. And in doing that, the third point, this is the technology. This is the tool which philosophers employ, right? Logical argument. In fact, if we say logical argument, in some sense, logical is a redundant adjective. But when we say logical argument, we're trying to emphasize that the arguments which we are producing are based on certain rationality. They have some kind of compulsion originated from rationality. And what kind of compulsion they assume? They say that if you accept my evidence, if you accept my experiment, if you accept my premises, then you cannot deny my conclusion. You cannot deny the claim which I am making. It is that kind of force which we say that it is logical argument. that if you accept the premises, if you accept the evidence, if you accept the experiments, you cannot deny the claim. If the argument is of that kind, then it is a logical argument in that way, though I find logical expression is redundant before argument, because argument is basically logical. So I hope you must have noticed these things. And regarding two very interesting questions which were raised in the preceding class, one was related to what we can call philosophy as a science of paradoxes. So my response was tentative, and it still is tentative. Why we can say like this? Because of course, the answers which philosophers offer, they're not absolute answers. Not only that, they keep the alternatives open. The possibilities related to different answers are open. They are not blocked by any particular answer. So much so that even the opposites of the answer are also considered among the possibilities, right? So it is that kind of, let us say, humility, you can say, a philosophical humility, that you don't claim in a very great way that this answer is final or absolute. Such kind of claims are made particularly if you see in a very dogmatic way in religious traditions. And if you want to differentiate between philosophical approach, scientific approach, and religious approach, and if you try to make a hierarchy of these three things and try to map it on the, let us say, variable dogmatism, so you can say that philosophy is less dogmatic. I would not say that it is completely free from dogma. And let us say it is least dogmatic. Then greater dogmatism you can see in sciences, and the greatest dogmatism you can see in religious traditions, right? So religion, if religion answers and you deny, maybe in certain cases your life is in threat, let alone other things. So when we say philosophy is a science of paradoxes, perhaps that is the intention, and we can discuss more on it if we wish. The second question was related to this observation in the definition of philosophy, that a philosopher is a moral entrepreneur. And I must thank both, in fact, Swadha and I think Sudhir Pathak raised this curiosity. And I asked that you please come up with some responses. For myself, I explored, I first time heard, I am thankful that this expression was brought to my notice. First time I heard this expression, moral entrepreneur, in the definition. And then I was curious to see who has introduced this expression, and then in a limited way I could trace that this sociologist, Howard S. Baker, first time used this expression, moral entrepreneur, in his wonderful small book, Outsiders, Studies in the Sociology of Deviance. Those who are interested, they can see this is a very small book, and I recommend it for those who are working in social sciences, particularly management, economics, and other such disciplines, literature. And this is nice to read even for biotechnologists or mathematicians. What he says in that book, and that is taken to be a kind of definition of moral entrepreneurs. What he's saying, that rules are the products of someone's initiative. And we can think of the people who exhibit such enterprise as moral entrepreneurs. And here he is talking about the rules, which are basically normative rules, moral rules. So moral entrepreneurs are basically the creators of what we call ethical norms. And they create norms because there is an urgent requirement, there is a necessity to organize and manage our affairs. And the purpose of creating new norms or new principles or new, let us say, points is to clearly outline or clearly find out who are the outliers, who are the violators, who are the outsiders. And then I noticed that this particular concept is associated with what we call ethical leadership. And this is, I think, a great area of research in management studies. And of course, this is a kind of study which is expected in every area. So who are ethical leaders? If you see, an ethical leader is supposed to demonstrate normatively appropriate conduct through his or her personal engagements, personal conduct, or through his or her interpersonal relationships. This is the most significant feature of an ethical leader. And in modern times, in our present time, we find a lot more ethical issues related to every area, related to every profession, every dimension of our life. And why we notice these problems? One answer is given that the leaders who are supposed to be our role models, they fail to demonstrate the application of ethical norms in their personal and interpersonal conducts. And then it's not just personal observation of moral norms, but also a kind of approach, a kind of effort to promote those norms or values in the followers, those who are looking for guidance, let us say moral guidance. And how you can do that? First of all, you must have a tendency to present yourself in such a way that you become role model for your subordinates, your followers. And you need to clearly communicate, and with required kind of feedback also, ensure that whatever you are exhibiting, communicating, imparting, that reaches to the intended audience or the intended persons, your subordinates, your followers. And they understand in the same sense in which you intend to communicate. And therefore, there is no communication gap in communicating the moral norms to your followers. And it is not just communicating and forgetting. You take initiative to reinforce it. So those who are outliers, those who are defaulters, you try to either counsel them, and if required, punish them. Not only that, you need to reward those who come up to your expectations, up to your, let us say, communication. So reward and punishment, counseling, right? These are the methods adopted by ethical leaders, and of course, in a compassionate way, not in a revengeful way, in a compassionate way that the followers, those who are looking for guidance, they are not harassed, they are not disrespected, and the ultimate objective is to utilize their competence for the betterment of the society, for the well-being of the society. So reinforcement is very important. And then decision making. An ethical leader doesn't leave the followers in limbo. A clear guideline, perfect. There is no confusion that you do this or that. Either our situation is not left to the people who are our hands. They must be clearly given the guideline. If you look at the Bhagavad Gita, Arjun asked Sri Krishna that you are telling so many things and I am confused. So please remove my delusion, please remove my sammoha and tell me clearly what I am to do, what I am required to do. Don't flood me with options. Clearly tell, because hands in fact should not be confused. Those who are our hands, they must be given. And I'm glad that 2 or 3 of our fellow learners belong to the establishment of military or other such areas. You see, in military, command is given, no confusion. It's not that, okay, either you can go there or there. No, you have to go there. So go there, that's all. So no confusion. Decision making is clear, definite, confident, and then hands are given those decisions for work, right? So I find, suppose ethical leader finds that the available norms, available principles are not good enough to deal with any emergent situation, or maybe can be dealt in a better way what has been done so far. So an ethical leader gives a new norm, sets a new path, a new trend, and then that ethical leader becomes moral entrepreneur by being the source of value creation, right? So this way I try to understand moral entrepreneur, and you might have some observation on that, so we can spend a few minutes on that. So are you ready with your own observation regarding moral entrepreneur? Sudhir ji and those who want to discuss, kuch baat karenge is pe? Oh, I forgot to share the document which I am using for. Okay, let me just share now. So I hope you heard what I was talking. So if you have some observation regarding moral entrepreneur or any question regarding any discussion, previous discussion, so we can take up that, any of you. I don't want to be in a situation of monologue. So please volunteer for your observations, or I left you in limbo. Who are moral entrepreneurs and what you think about it more, or maybe you can just break what is entrepreneur. Maybe management students can tell clearly what you mean by entrepreneur.
Hello.
Yes, please.
Yes, sir. So, sir, I want to know the moral entrepreneur Maybe an individual or an organization or a group of members.
Yeah, that's a good question. It could be both, right? For example, the source of any norm is certainly an individual if you look in that way. If you consider an organization is also legally an individual, what you call legal person, right? So this status of being legal person is given to organization or a collective or a group or a person, individual being, individual human person. So to that extent, we can say that yes, even organization could be, for example, today we are looking for what we call the organizations which are torch bearers or who are role models for other organizations. Consider in engineering, we think that IITs are the role models. IISc is a role model. For management, we say that IIMs are role model, right? So every other institution tries to adopt the best practices of those institutions, right?
So we can
So
conclude,
yes,
sir, that moral entrepreneurs may be divided in segments.
segments mean either a human person, individual person, or or organization. That segment you are
No,
talking.
in maybe in the field of areas, like if we are talking about the philosophy, or if we are talking about some science projects, and if we are talking about the social culture of our society, then the role of moral entrepreneur is continuously shifting. Yeah, more than one persons can be the moral entrepreneur for the society and for particular segment. Let's we say can say science or some other projects.
So what you are suggesting, I think, is that every area requires a unique approach uh, for uh, moral decisions, and a particular area may require a particular moral norm which is not relevant to others. Maybe to some extent this is correct, but we are trying to understand norms or principles which are of universal nature, and they are applied in different areas in different ways. For example, we can be honest. Now, in being honest or in being fair, if we are working, let us say, in police department, so the ways we can show our fairness or honesty would be certainly different from the way a teacher can show fairness or honesty in his or her area of work, right? So it could be a kind of differences in instantiation of the universal norms. Whether norms could be specified in such a way, there could be such effort, but then we are looking for some examples which you can offer that these particular norms are applicable only in this area and they are irrelevant in other areas.
We can say that sir, a saint or a guru can be a moral entrepreneur for universal definition.
Moral entrepreneur is understood in a very neutral way, right? Anyone who creates values, new norms, new principles can be called moral entrepreneur, right? So as a source of norm, as a source of value creator or a value creator or a norm creator, you can call that moral entrepreneur, right? And as we have seen, it could be an organization, it could be an individual person, an exemplar. For example, Guru Nanak Dev. Guru Nanak Dev set a path. You can call him moral entrepreneur. Prophet Muhammad set a path. You can call him moral entrepreneur. Lord Krishna, or such great exemplars in the society. Right? Yes. Amit ji, you wanted to say something?
Sir, I have in box.
Sir, Amit asked a question in chat box. Sir, do you think
Yes,
that
please.
Krishna was moral entrepreneur at that time, who I think gave new paths to life?
We are unable to hear you, Amitji, properly somehow because of your network problems. So
I can read his
yes,
question.
Amitji wrote something. Sir,
Yes,
do
sir.
you think that Krishna was moral entrepreneur at that time, who I think gave new paths to live? So yeah, just now I mentioned that yes, you can consider him as a kind of moral entrepreneur for setting certain new ideals, certain new approaches. For example, the concept of nishkam karma, right? So at least he has reformulated, or in his name this concept is prevalent. The concept of sthit pragya is someone who works for the well-being of the whole of humanity. Log sangrah ke liye kaam karte, right? So yes, Lord Krishna, Guru Nanak Dev, or any exemplar of the society, all the great was given in 1963 by Becker. So it's not that only expression is new, but idea is, of course, is with the society. So any other observation, any other query regarding our previous discussion? I hope I am making some sense, if not complete sense, at least some sense. And wherever you find difficulty, wherever you find problem, you please share. And I request all of you to make additions on the basis of your own understanding, your own experience, your own exposure. You all are, you are just one step back to me. I am in the profession and you are looking for being part of this profession, right? So it's one step, right? But then, you know, children are more smarter than the elders because of the science and technology. So I expect that you all share anything which you feel relevant, which need to be brought in to this platform. So you're welcome to contribute to that. So if you want to share, or then we can take up, or let me just put one more point in the scene, then you can maybe come back. Now, we have been discussing the concept of philosophy from, in some sense, we can call Western perspective. The Western thinkers, the Western philosophers presented this notion before us. Now, it is natural for you to be curious that what is philosophy in India? What would be a perspective of philosophy in India? So, as you can see on the screen, I hope it is visible to all of you. The concept philosophy in India is understood as darshan. And if you look at the expression darshan, it is a Sanskrit word. It is coming from a root word called drish, which means in English to see, to realize, to visualize. And if you look at the Sanskrit definition of darshana, it is defined as drishyate anena iti darshanam. Drishyate anena iti darshanam. Or you can say drishyate yathartha tattvam anena iti darshanam. Drishyate anena, anena is instrumentality, right? This is tatiya. So through which we see something. through which we visualize something, through which we understand something, is called darshan. And the specification part, you can see, drishyate yathartha tattvam. Yathartha means the way it is, anything the way it is. So through which we see anything the way it is called darshan. यथा अर्थ, जो जैसा है उसको वैसा ही दिखाने वाला दर्शन है. जो चीज जैसी है उसको वैसा ही दिखाए दर्शन है. Right? So, from Indian perspective, philosophy is instrumental to see reality as it is. Philosophy enables us to see the way things are. Now, what is there in the reality if you look at? So I pointed out that in the whole of reality, you can broadly conceptualize that I am in the reality, and then there are other things which is not me. So I and what is not I. The whole of reality. I and its complementary class. So when we say seeing the way reality is, the tool which we use is philosophy, is darshan. Now, this doesn't in fact unfold much. Yes, we can understand in a very, let us say, vague way that the whole of reality consists of me and what is not me. So we raise this question, who am I? And what are the things surrounding me? From here, every system of Indian philosophy starts developing its proposal. So the whole of reality is called, in a very simple term, tattva. Here it is written, tattva. Most of the time we use this expression, tattva, isme koi tattva hai ki nahi. Let us see little closely this expression, tattva. It is tat and tva. Tat means thisness or thatness. Tat. And tva is just an abstraction, in fact, over tat. So when we say reality, tattva, it means beingness of what is there. Beingness of what is there. So I am in the reality. So who am I actually? And how are the things, or what are the things which are surrounding us? So these two important questions. And when we try to look at the answer, of course, descriptive or let us say narrative answers will provide some guideline, but that is limited. For example, if I explain in a fantastic language with all clear expressions what is a gulab jamun, and suppose you have not eaten it earlier, nor even up to now, so howsoever fantastic description and articulation I have, I cannot generate the feeling of taste which can be generated only by eating or consuming gulab jamun. Again, I refer to the Bhagavad Gita. Look at this wonderful prasanga. You know, in the chapter 10 of the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna, this chapter is also called Vibhuti Yoga. So he identifies himself with many wonderful things, right? Buddhim buddhimatam buddhimanam buddhim buddhimatam asmi. बुद्धिमानों में मैं बुद्धि हूँ. अश्वत्थ वृक्षाणाम अश्वत्थम. In all trees I am ashwatha, right? People vriksha. Rishinam kapilo muni. In all rishis I am kapil, right? In this way, Lord Krishna identifies himself with so many wonderful things. But then in the last sloka, he makes even a wonderful remark, that he says that whatever I say and whatever you see the reality, I hold all these things just by a tiny part of me. Which means whatever Lord Krishna says in this Vibhuti Yoga part, that is just a kind of indication. But then Arjun is looking for a kind of taste, that what it is. They're suggesting that, yes, you have narrated it wonderfully, and I don't doubt that you have misled me. You have made correct representation of what you are. To what extent you made, it is correct. I am convinced. But then I want to see that. So the chapter 11, where you have Vishwarupa Darshana Yoga, there you find the third sloka. Arjuna is clearly demanding tamatmanam parameshwara evam, जैसा आपने बोला, एतद जैसा है, यथा आह, आथ means बोला, कहा. So the way you are, what you are, you said that way. You talked about yourself, O Lord Parameshwara. You talked about yourself the way you actually are. But then you are just talking, right? Drishtum ichchami te rupam aishwaram purushottam. I want to see it. Merely narration, merely description is not helping me to realize who you are. Drishtum ichchami te rupam. I want to see that. What you are telling me, this telling will do only little. I want to realize it. I want to see it. That's why this chapter is called Vishwarupa Darshana Yoga. Darshan, right? It's coming from the same expression, darshan. So darshan enables us to see things, right? And in our research, what we are going to do basically, we are certainly going to narrate our story, our project, our findings. We're going to narrate. But then if we are simply untouched, if we are simply narrating, telling, not realizing, then we are missing something. By presenting a thesis work, there must be something transformative to our personality. And I won't be expecting too much from any researcher to see that once you are done with your research work, there is something additional to your personality. Some transformation has already taken place at the level of your understanding, at the level of your approach, at the level of your dealing with the objects. And certainly to some extent, it happens with every researcher. I'm not talking about those who offer money to someone to write their thesis. I'm talking about all of you who are going to take up this study clearly with all definite objective. Something must happen. That means the philosophical approach which you adopt in presenting your thesis or project to anyone, to the whole world, even if it doesn't produce any significant impact on the existing state of knowledge, at least you generate the kind of capability which was not there in the world hitherto, let us say. Because you are a fresh piece, right, in this world. You are not repeated, you are not duplicated. And you know God has, if there is God. So nobody is repeated. And even in the notion of what we call rebirth, nothing is repeated. It's not basically rebirth. It's a rebirth of only attitudes, not to bring that thing here. So what is essential about the concept darshana is the approach to see things and see things the way they are, which means in seeing, our claim is not influenced by the fact that I am making this claim. In fact, the ideal situation is that anyone who would have arrived or who would have done the kind of experiments you are going to do, or anyone who would have collected the kind of sample you are going to collect, or anyone who would have read the literature, the literature which you are going to read, would have presented the same kind of or similar kind of work. So here we are minimizing our subjectivity in our findings, right? And in that process, there's some transformation is taking place. And I would emphasize this particular thing having a transformative effect on our personality time and again when we go deeper into different practices related to research and publication. Time and again, I would like to emphasize this part, that something new must happen. Every day you attain a state which you would have not attained if you would not have taken that kind of project, right? So let us have that kind of aspiration, that kind of hope. So Indian conception is very clear in that way, that philosophy must enable us to see things the way they are. And the tool which philosophy provides, from our, in fact, academic perspective, I would not go into any other dimension, but just in the logical dimension of what we call philosophy. Because we are going to learn, we are going to discover or find something through a discursive method. It's not any other way but to have a kind of discourse. And of course, that discourse must be supported by the required or adequate kind of data, either in terms of your experiments, laboratory experiments, or your field observations, or by going through the literature, right? So we are going to take up only that dimension of philosophy in little detailed way, which we find academically directly, immediately relevant. Other things are not irrelevant, but if we are looking for a clear guideline that, okay, this must be there so that it can be operationalized. So from that perspective, you find two dimensions of philosophy. One is logic other is ethics. So certainly ethics we are going to take up in rather detailed way. तो आपके अंदर ये क्यूरियोसिटी टू सम एक्सटेंट satisfy हुई होगी कि why you need to study philosophy and philosophical concepts. And let me not tell you why we should study. Instead, let me just demonstrate you what is the essential practice in philosophy. So now again, my question to all of you, I have written these two words, philosophy here, let us say in yellow, and philosophy here in, let me say, green. So just by observing it, just by seeing it on a screen, I think you can see it, or shall I make it bigger? Any of you please volunteer to tell me the way you see the difference between these two visuals on the screen. What is the difference between these two?
One philosophy is under inverted commas.
That is visual. So what it means when we write philosophy without inverted comma and when we write within inverted, what is the difference between these two? This is related to methodology basically. So you please, you will be doing that. So I just want to have an understanding from your side.
Hello.
You just try.
Hello.
It's not any kind of testing. Yes, Sudhirji.
Yes, about inverted commas philosophy, that means it has a definite particular definition, and in yellow highlighted part, it can be very term to term definition of philosophy.
Color हमने रखा है. Color is not to highlight, only just to make you see it clearly. So no, color is not meant for highlighting. Yes.
First, philosophy means its definition, or we can say its terms can be vary at first the understanding of person to person. But in inverted commas, the philosophy term, that means it has a particular definite term or particular definition that cannot be changed.
When you want to emphasize something in philosophy, so you put it in inverted. So certainly this is a correct response. We use inverted to emphasize certain thing, right?
Yes.
We use inverted to quote something. We use inverted to emphasize something, right? So this is the essential practice we have. But that is one way of doing it. Of course, if we want to emphasize what this word means in certain ways, then we put inverted. But there is another technical dimension to this. One answer Sudhir gave, that is very correct. Thank you, Sudhir. So I'm looking for another answer. And as per my understanding, there are only two answers. So one I got from Sudhir ji. I'm looking for another option. And if you can have some more addition, that would be wonderful. आप किताबें पढ़ते हैं, किताबों में ऐसा लिखा होता है और न्यूज़पेपर में लिखते हैं. बहुत सारे narrations में you have this practice.
Sir, we use it to phrase a sentence that has been spoken by someone. That is, if somebody's speech.
Yes, that is quotation. Yes.
Yeah. If there is somebody's quotation or somebody's exact speech we want to put in, we put it inside inverted commas.
Yes. So thank you. Sudhir, in fact, told this very thing, that if we want to emphasize or quote someone, then we put inverted. And there is another requirement of inverted. Those who are in social sciences and literature, I think they are more familiar with this. So I want to hear from them. Because such practice is less, I think, exercised in sciences and technology. But certainly in management, in economics, in literature, it's a huge practice. Okay, not to wait for more. So as per my understanding, when we write a word in inverted, what we mean is the linguistic unit, the word as a linguistic unit. That means we are talking about the word philosophy as a linguistic unit. And when we try to understand philosophy and its etymology, So we have understood earlier that this word philosophy is coined with the help of two Greek words, again in inverted philos and then inverted sophia. And then we said that that means again in inverted love of wisdom or love of knowledge. So when we try to communicate the linguistic dimension of that word, how this word is coined, how this word is used to mean what, then we are putting inverted. So here the indication is this word as part of language, the language which we are using. So philosophy is a word of English language. Darshan in inverted, when we write, is a word in Sanskrit language, right? So when we put inverted, we mean the word, and then we try to analyze it as linguistic unit, and the way this symbol word is used to pick out something in the reality or in our thought, right? And when normally we write without inverted, right, in our language. So then all these words, they are not just words, in fact. Of course, they are part of any language. So they are words, but our intention to communicate by using that word is not word itself. We want to communicate something which we call concepts, right? So first word philosophy refers to concept, and the second word refers to very word itself, how it is coined, how it is in this way developed, right? Now let us have a conceptual understanding of what is concept. So again, I'll ask question, how do you understand what is concept? From here we will advance. So what is concept? क्या समझते हैं इस word से? Concept का मतलब क्या है?
Sir, an abstract idea.
Yes, please.
Sir, an abstract idea.
Adjective abstract?
Yes, abstract idea or the
Anything else you want to say? Any of us? How do you understand concept? What concept means? Okay, let me refer to one philosopher, Frege, and don't worry about what he is saying regarding any other thing. So he presented the understanding of concept in this way. We have experience through our senses. So different sensory experiences are with us. And through all these senses, we come to know different dimensions of reality. We perceive colors, we smell, we taste, right? We hear, we touch, right? So different senses reveal different dimensions of, so experience is generated through these senses. Now, when we have similar experience repeatedly, then we are looking for something. When we drink tea, it tastes sweet if there is sugar. Again, we take it. If sugar is there, we say it is sweet. And suddenly, if there is no sweet, we say that, okay, chini nahi hai isme. Right? So what is common between the experiences where we are prompted to use this expression sweet, and then what suddenly happens where we don't have such usage and say that there is something missing? So if you look at in a rather figurative way, every experience leads to, let us say, some kind of mental impression or image. Some image, it's like you watch something, and if that object is removed from your sight, then an image is left on that. You watch, let us say, a flower, beautiful flower, and you turn your gaze in different direction, to some image, some color of that is left in you, right? So let us call that mental impressions. Frege calls them idea. Mental impressions are called idea. Basically, if you see little philosophically, then what we call mental impressions, they are in some sense faint impressions. They are not as vivid, as clear as the reality itself. One day, one of my students came and said that, sir, I watch my image in mirror, but then I think that the image which I see in the mirror, I don't look like that. This is a kind of articulation of the difference between what actual reality is and what its image is. So mental impressions are images, mental images of what is there in the reality. Now, when we have repeated mental image or impressions in our mind, we tend to use a word for that. We tend to use a symbol for that so that we can refer to that experience. We can share that experience with others, right? So we form concepts. We form concepts over mental impressions. Mental impressions are rather vivid. They are closer to our experience. When we are watching something, then we are directly experiencing it. So impressions are very strong, right? But when that thing is removed from the sight, still something is left in the mind, right? To that we call mental impression. And then when we have similar mental impressions repeatedly in different encounters, then we start what we call forming concepts. Concepts are, as you rightly said, some kind of abstractions, some kind of abstraction over ideas, over mental impressions. But remember, concepts are still mental. They are not out as of now. Concepts are there in our mind. When we use certain symbols to verbalize our concepts, then they become part of language, right? So concepts are expressed or verbalized by using different symbols. Through body language, we can express our concepts. Through different designs, through different paintings, we can express our concepts. We can use explicit language. We can use poetry, we can use prose, we can use any such linguistic medium to verbalize our concepts. Concepts are mental, right? And we want to share those concepts with others. So we use certain symbols which are already shared, which are already in the public domain, right? So we are using that, and somehow through conventions, through tradition, the humanity has established a relationship between the symbols and the mental content, what you call concept. And we learn all these things right from our childhood. And that process is called concept acquisition, right? We acquire concepts. And then we use language. And there is an intimate relationship, of course it is conventional, between concepts and language which you use. So the same concept can be verbalized in different languages. Consider, for example, if we consider philosophy and darshan mean one and the same practice, then we can say that it is the concept of philosophy, which is said in one way, philosophy, in another way, darshan, maybe in a different way, falsafa, or in any other language, we can use that expression, right? But concept is the same. But our mental reality is not that easy, is not that straightforward. Of course, जिसको कहते हैं मोटी मोटी बातें तो ठीक है, फिक्स है. If I say this is pen, so you easily understand this is pen, right? But if there is no possibility of such ostension, or we call indication, or we call some kind of application of any such tangible thing where I can make you understand that I mean this, which means if we're talking about the relationships at our conceptual level, then the ambiguity or vagueness is inevitable. In some sense, it is unavoidable. But then we try to avoid it, we try to clarify it, we try to achieve greater clarity to the extent that the intended audience, the intended reader gets it. And gets what? Gets the same concept which I carry in my mind. If by using mode of communication, I communicate the same thing, so what I do, I encode my concepts into symbols and I communicate through that symbols. And then the receiver receives and decodes it and gets that concept. So two human beings, in fact, जो signaling process और ये communication, they all are based on this kind of understanding. अगर ये आदमी आदमी के बीच ऐसा हुआ नहीं होता तो ये इतना इंटरनेट जो हो रहा है, नेटवर्किंग, ये पॉसिबल नहीं होता, right? So what is happening actually, we are encoding our concepts into certain symbols, then using a medium, maybe body language or any such painting or any caricature, etc. And then we are communicating. And if the reader gets the same meaning, the same concept and meaning, we can understand in similar way, right? Or not to confuse these two things at this stage. So concept which I have in my mind is communicated. And if the decoding is efficient enough, then you get the same concept. Otherwise, what we call, if you get a different concept or maybe a little changed concept, then it is possible where we say that it is gap of communication or miscommunication or some alteration in communication, right? So try to understand, only this was the intention for bringing in these two visuals so that you're clear. And Fraga further says that what you call thought is basically a beautiful or a meaningful organization of concepts. So thoughts are basically much more complex forms than what we call experience or mental impressions or concepts. And when we have linguistic communication, we are communicating thoughts. Thoughts are involving concepts. Concepts are linked to mental impressions, and mental impressions are drawn from experiences. So howsoever abstract thinking we are having, it makes sense only when we are able to connect that thinking to experience. And there is no human thinking which is not connectable in that way. Otherwise, it becomes meaningless, right? Whether you are doing pure mathematics or any probabilistic theory, etc., or you are doing social sciences or literature or basic sciences, howsoever abstract, lengthy derivation you have, if you are unable it to connect to experience, every stage of your derivation, that's the stage of learning. In fact, once you are master, you are competent, then of course you can go and play with symbols, and then whenever it is required, you can connect to experience. But at the level of learning, every stage of our derivation must be connected to experience in order to make sense of it. And that we all start from, in fact, beginning, right from our nursery or KG classes, and gradually we advance into abstraction, right? So thoughts are regarded as combination of concepts. So this is related to philosophy as a discipline and philosophy as a concept. And I think through this medium, I could clarify the difference between what you call concept and other things. Now, time is in fact over, so we are yet to come up to the branches. Just briefly, I'll tell metaphysics is, you can say, study of reality. These are very crude formulations. The study of knowledge. And axiology is basically understood as the study of values or norms, whatever you would like to say, norms. These are the branches, major branches in philosophy. We study what is there in the reality, and as I said, reality involves me and something what is not me. So different dimensions of both. What actually am I? What actually are the things surrounding me? And then we make claim, we identify ourselves with this or that. I am this, I am that, right? We identify ourselves with our body, with our senses, with our mind, with our different social roles, different professional roles, right? So we have a perspective towards them, right? We see ourselves as this or that. Similarly, we see other things as this or that. And therefore, the very practice or the very process of seeing also becomes a matter of study, right? So the way I am revealed to myself, what is that way? The way things are revealed to me, how they are revealed. What is this revelation itself? And when something is revealed, how do we know that it is correctly revealed? And what are the different sources of knowledge? What are the different instruments of knowledge? That becomes part of what we call epistemology. And axiology is a normative discipline. It talks about values, norms. And if the values or norms are applicable to evaluate our aesthetic experiences, then it is called aesthetics. This is one of the significant branches within axiology, within the larger discipline of philosophy. Then if we are studying values and norms, which are applicable to human conduct, then we call it. So axiology is understood in this study as the study of values and norms. We will delve more deeply on this part, particularly on ethics part in our next class, and then we will move on to further discussion. So with these notes, I stop here. Already I have bored you sufficiently, I think.